Hi everyone, my name is Matt. I'm the youth and family pastor at Cornerstone Church in Marshfield, here today with your Cornerstone Connection, a daily devotional. Well, happy 2023. I just want to be sure to tell you that, and I hope your year is off to a good start. And here at Cornerstone, as you hopefully know by this time, we've started a new Bible reading plan. We're actually doing a 2-year Bible reading plan that will take us through the entire Bible. And so you'll notice on that plan that is probably linked into this video that it's going through both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so today we're in the books of Genesis and Matthew and chapter 4 of both. And what is so interesting is we see two scenes in both of these chapters that parallel each other quite well. But I want to set it up with this. A few years back, I went to a seminar, a leadership training, and the speaker there presented a formula to all of us. And the formula was this: E plus R equals O. E plus R equals O. And here's what the formula was all about. E represented an event. So events happen in life. And they can be good events, they can be tragic events, they can be just normal events. But his point in this was that the event itself doesn't need to determine the O, which means the outcome. Just because this event happens doesn't mean this outcome must be. Instead, there's this thing he called the R. And that's the response, and that's our response. So when events happen in our life, we have the responsibility to respond, and how we respond to those events will then determine the outcome. It can determine a positive outcome or it can determine a negative outcome, but a lot of times our response plays a major role in determining that outcome. Now I share that with you today because as we look at both Genesis 4 and Matthew 4, we see two men that find themselves in similar events, facing similar events, but they have two completely different responses, and therefore they have two very different outcomes. In Genesis chapter 4, we're introduced to two brothers, Cain and Abel. And if you know the story, Cain and Abel, Cain's the older brother, then Abel's the younger brother. Cain keeps the ground, Abel takes care of the sheep. And they both bring an offering to God. But what we find out is that Abel gave of his firstborn. He gave his very best to God, and Cain just gave some sort of offering that the Lord was not pleased with. And so the Lord is not pleased with Cain's offering, therefore Cain is in a way feeling rejected. And he feels bad about this, and he's angry. And his anger begins to be stirred up in him. And we find in Genesis chapter 4 where it says this: in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, but Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right," here it is, "sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." And so we find out that Cain is tempted. He's being tempted to sin, and he eventually gives in to that temptation. And if you know the rest of the story, he takes his brother out into the field. He takes Abel out into the field, and he ends up committing the very first murder. So we have Cain facing this event, facing this temptation, as sin is crouching at his door. And then we turn to Matthew chapter 4. Where it says in verses 1 and 2, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Then the tempter came to him." And if you've read this chapter of Matthew before, here's what you know. You know that though Jesus was extremely hungry, though he was facing great temptation to give in to the devil's temptations, and Satan comes to him 3 different times and tempts him in 3 different ways, but he responds in a very different way than Cain. He doesn't give in to his flesh. Instead, if you've read this before, you know every single time he responds with the word of God, and he says, "It is written, it is written, it is written." And friends, I don't know about you, but I'm challenged by that, because all of us, though we may be Christians, you may or may not be, but if you are, your flesh still is within you, and we still are tempted, and we're still tempted to sin. And the question is, that's the event. Temptation's the event. How are we going to respond to that temptation? And I know that when I respond, as Jesus responds, the outcome is much different, much more positive, much more God glorifying, much more good for me and for others. But when I respond in my flesh, and I allow that sin that's crouching at the door to come in the door, the outcomes look a lot more like Cain's situation. So the question for all of us today is, what is your response going to be when events happen, good and bad? Will we gratify the desires of our sinful nature, or will we seek to gratify God and what he desires and what he wants? Because that is what's best for us, for others, and that's what gives him glory. Have a great day, friends. Can't wait to see you next time on the Cornerstone Connection.